Hello, welcome to Take Refuge 3D. If you're new, welcome back, and if not, then welcome. So in this overview tutorial, we're going to create an awesome retro stylized effect on our 3D model. So in this video, we're going to be making an NPR, or non-photorealistic effect, using a technique of layering PBR, or physically based rendering techniques, or physically based maps onto our mesh to create a PS1 or PS2 era retro aesthetic. So at the end of the tutorial, we'll end up with one texture map that has all the lighting and details and highlights and everything baked in. So this would be great for, you know, like mobile games or retro games, or just like if you want to make a cool stylized effect for your renders. So the technique that we're going to use, like, it's not software dependent, it could be software agnostic, and you could hypothetically do the layering in Photoshop or GIMP. You could use Blender to achieve this effect with a little bit more difficulty, but I'm going to use Marmoset Toolbag, as it allows me to generate all the map passes, including lighting, normals, curvature, that I'll need to achieve the desired effect. Because unlike something like Substance Painter, it's also a render engine, and it allows me to use a lot of passes. So you can see we've got all of these different passes we can use, and that's going to help us out a lot. Now, quickly before you dive in, I just want to show you how I set up and prepared the model. It's not a modeling tutorial or a UV mapping tutorial. I do have other videos on that, but I'll give you an overview of how I got this mesh into Marmoset. So first of all, in plasticity, I created my high and low poly mesh for the TV. You'll see that the low poly is extremely simple, right? So it's the only complex shape on here is the actual curvature of the screen, which we might be able to see a little bit better by using a matte cap. So the curvature of the screen, everything else is pretty much flat, right? So and the only large curves that I've got are the ones that are around the edge of the model here. Even in here, I'm only using chamfers, not fillets, so we want lots of hard edges. And if we look at our high poly, much the same, except it's still all hard edges, and this is important because you'll see why later. We don't want to do any micro filleting, but I did put a little bit of detail onto this. I think this might be a yeah, I used some weird pushing and pulling of control vertices there to get a little bit of shape and nuance on there. I added a bit of detail here and added these lights, which thing, and just added some vents to the side. So like this is the high poly and this little disk drive thing. So the high poly and the low poly are both very similar, except the high poly has a little bit more details with like vents and disk drives and things like that, and they do jut out a little bit. So then we went over into Blender. Okay, so and we got a low and a high poly, and I imported these as Ngon only. So if we turn off our modifier stack, you'll see that we got this Ngon model coming in. Okay, and then what I did is I used the plugin Ngon Pro that I made to create the low poly, and then I can edit the sort of detail of the mesh. I found 41 to be quite useful. Okay, link in the description for that. Also on plasticity, if you don't know what plasticity actually is, it's a CAD program, so it doesn't use polygons, it uses the powerful Parasolid kernel. You can get a 30 days free trial, link in the description, and then I've got an affiliate code as well. So just a little plug for plasticity and a little plug for Ngon Pro. So then with the low poly, we can switch that off. Hang on, where are we? Up here. We'll just switch that off. And then I got the high poly here. And so what we did here with the high poly, you can see that this has also been imported as an Ngon, but it's got its full sort of detail of all the bits and pieces, and some quite high detailed pieces here. They probably didn't need to be that detailed. And then I also used Ngon Pro to make the high poly. Okay, I also used Ngon Pro to add some vertex colors to the different aspects of these things. So if we turn our wireframe off, you can see I put red for the lights, 2 different colors for the keyboard, and then yellow for the knobs and blue for the screen. And we're just going to use these as masks in Marmoset Toolbag. I also added some cables to both the low and high poly. So using the Cable Radar plugin. So you know, I've just got that set up here. You can create cables like so, and they're very easy to play around with, you know. So that's how I got the cables in there. They're not even connected, but don't worry about that, because that's something that Marmoset will deal with for our use case as well. So let's head over into Marmoset, and we can look at this mesh and see what it looks like there. And well, let's just go back to Blender and just talk about the UVs for a second. So if we just turn our low poly back on and our high poly off. Okay, so the UV map, I just figured out a few things. I made the base really small because we're not going to be able to see that, and I kept everything else roughly the same size except for the screen, which I made a little bit bigger, and everything else is kind of just packed in there. And I used UV Pack Master to pack my mesh, which is a paid add-on, but Blender has its own internal packer as well. You don't need to buy anything to be able to pack your UVs like that. So that's all good. I used a combination of marking my seams and unwrapping, and just in some areas I did a smart UV unwrap. So that's that. So that was for our low poly. And then this is important, before we export to Blender, you select everything, both your meshes, so they're overlapping like that, and you just select everything in object mode, and you can export as an FBX file, export FBX, wherever that is, and then you just want to go selected objects only. And if you're not using the plugins, you probably also want to triangulate the faces, but I didn't need to because I put apply modifiers, so it already triangulates for me. So you just export as one FBX, and that's important because when we come over into Marmoset, we'll just start a new scene. Okay, I do not want to save the changes to this. So this is basically what you'll see in Marmoset, and you've got these little toolbars up here. So this one that looks like a loaf of bread is a new bake project. So we want to bake. I just want to change this back to full quality, and once we've got our bake project in, we can now load a mesh. So I'm just going to load this mesh and figure out where I saved it first. So clicking on our bake project, we hit load, and I actually saved it in this bakes folder. So this is, I saved this as bakes. This has got my 2 meshes in it, and if we open this up, it brings in what looks like the low poly. But if we click on our thing that says computer, we'll see that we've got a high and a low, and the high is actually hidden. So if I unhide the high and we hide the low, we can see that we've got our high poly mesh. Now I'm just going to bring this default high material onto the high poly, and we're just going to give it a little bit of color. Okay, and what I want to do also is I just want to hit the sky, and I just want to choose a different HDR so we can get a bit of a different lighting effect on here. So we've got this computer here, and what we want to do is we want to go to render up here, and we want to change the render engine from rasterization to ray tracing. Okay, so now you'll see that it looks a bit nicer. You can see a little bit of denoising going on. And now for our default high texture, this actually has an inbuilt bevel baker. So what we want to do is we want to change the normals under this surface thing. We don't want to add a map or anything. We just want to change, where is it? Under surface, we want to change the normals to bevel. Okay, and you may not notice anything straight away, but if we bring this bevel width up, you can start to see that everything's getting beveled. And if I shift and right click, I can drag this around, and even these unconnected cables are getting a little bit of a bevel. So we can also change the angle of our bevel, and we can change the bevel samples right up. You can even go higher than that. So I don't want quite that much of a bevel, but I do want a bevel, right? And this is going to help drive our 2D maps later on. So we've got that there. Okay, and basically now we don't need to look at our high poly ever again. So we can turn that off, and we can turn our low poly back on. Okay, we can click on our bake project, and at the moment it's on interactive baking, which for a lot of cases is fine, and that means every time we make a change it's going to rebake all the maps and save them. We don't really want that for this project, because we're going to use a lot of maps, so we don't want that rebaking 12 maps every time. So we're going to change this bake mode to offline. Okay, everything else we can remain the same, but we want to configure our maps. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to leave, we've got normals, normal object, curvature, we want to keep all of those. We've got ambient occlusion, we want to keep that. We've got material ID, we're not using material ID, we're using vertex colors, okay, as I showed you before. We also want to turn on position and cavity, and then we want to turn on complete lighting, diffuse lighting, and specular lighting. We might not use all of these in this process, but you'll see what we'll have. So down here it's set to 2K resolution, that's fine for now, and we're going to bake everything. Okay, so we can go ahead and hit the preview material, and it's going to ask us for an output path. Actually, we'll just make a new folder here called tutorial. Excuse me if you can hear noises in the background. Bedtime at family. And we're going to just call this bakes 2, just for the sake of knowing that they're separate files. So now it's baking 10 maps. So we can wait for these to bake. Okay, so once this bakes, okay, so that's all baked, and you can now see that there is a ambient occlusion in normal maps, but what you'll also notice is that it's a bit janky, like this is off kilter and all of that. So what we really want to do is we want to fix our normals. So let's go back into our bake project, click on our low poly, and then you'll see this mesh here. And if we turn on our high poly, I know I said we don't need to look at our high poly again, but we might for this one. You can see that some of these things are jutting out. So what we can do is we can increase our maximum offset here until they're not jutting out anymore. And then we can estimate the offset. Okay, and nothing's jutting out. But you can see that some of these are kind of like overlapping and stuff like that. So what we can now do is we can paint our offset, right? So we've got this paint here, and a dark value is going to make things smaller, and a light value is going to make things bigger. So it's kind of at its maximum at the moment, but if we just go around these and make them smaller, and just make sure that the mesh doesn't actually come outside, you'll be able to tell if it does for the high poly. Okay, and then like on these keys as well, we don't want too much on these keys here and just around here. But our low poly doesn't have a lot of geometry, so there's not a lot we can do. And maybe just around the edges of this here, and that way we're just getting a lot more of a refined bake. Also these cables are a little bit, we can just find an angle to get those down a bit. Okay, but I think overall nothing's jutting out anymore. And the other thing that we want to do is, if we just go and look at this, turn our high poly off, okay, you can see this mesh, it's kind of like pointing in a funny direction, like the the light is pointing in a funny direction, and that's the ambient occlusion. So if we actually look at our default map and we just look at our occlusion, and if we just turn it right down, you'll notice that it's got some funny angles to it in our ambient occlusion map. And the reason for that is that the direction that the rays are coming in when we're baking these maps is at a funny angle. So if we click on our low again and we go show skew and we zoom in on these normal directions, you see that they're all pointing out in a funny direction. So the reason that this is coming in at an angle is because these are pointing out at an angle. So what we want to do is we want to paint our skew. Okay, we want to go I think I clicked paint offset, so we're going to bake our skew. So we want to go for a full black value, make the size and flow of our brush really big, and then we just want to paint all over our mesh so that all of our normals, our skew normals for the bake, are perpendicular to the actual mesh that they're on. So now these are all pointing directly out, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow the bake to sort of have a little bit more of a 2D effect. Like if you're like baking like an organic mesh, so you basically want all these UVs here to be like dead black, right? If you like baking a more organic mesh, you might not want this effect, but for this particular workflow, we do. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to bake our maps again, and we're going to just turn off vertex color for now, and we'll bake all our maps again, and that's all done. So you can see that like there is a bevel effect on some of these things, and what we can do is we can actually go into our default high, go into our bake project. We don't actually need like these lighting maps on right now, and just for our, we just want to sort of like rebake our normals and our curvature. We can leave the cavity and the AO off, and we can actually now we can turn on the real-time interactive, and we can just go into our default high and we can start messing with our bevel width. So we might want to get a little bit more bevel out of that, and that will bake those two maps. And we can just preview the material, and I think that's quite nice actually. And we can bring our AO back up just for now, just to visualize it. Okay, so I'm thinking that's looking quite nice. We've got our bevels where they need to be. If we go to this little cog wheel, we can turn our wireframe up. Right, let's just make it greener. Turn our wireframe up, and you can see that this is the low poly mesh, but we have these bevels baked in, so that's really cool. That's a really nice effect. We've got all of our bits and bobs. So what we're going to do now is go back to the bake. We'll actually turn that wireframe off again. Okay, and I actually want to, we've got our normals, I actually want to leave the curvature on and the vertex on, and we'll go back to being non-interactive offline, and we're just going to change this to 4096 by 4096. I want these two to be a higher resolution. Okay, and the reason for that is we're going to get a little bit more detail out of it, and you can get some artifacting that's not useful. But what you'll notice here is that even these knobs have got the bevel effect applied to them, so we really got quite a high poly looking mesh with not very many polygons out of that. But that's not what we're here for today. We're here for something else. So next to the bake icon, okay, I'm going to change these back to 2048 by 2048. And we can add now a texture project. Okay, so we've got our texture project here, and then by selecting the default material that we're on, okay, we can then just click linked, link the currently selected material in the material editor to this texture project. Okay, and it's going to fill in the normal. It's going to fill in an automatically generated curvature and the AO, and we can add more maps to this as we go. But right now what we want to do, we want to bring in our normal object normal OBJ, okay, and we want to bring in our vertex color, which will be always at the bottom because it starts with a V. Okay, so now we've got our bake maps and our texture, and we can go over into the texturing panel. Okay, so if we go to full quality, we can see what we've got here. We've got this computer. Now if you're wanting to do PBR, that's fine, but for this tutorial we're doing like a retro stylized effect, so we're probably mostly going to be looking at the albedo map for this. So just to start with, okay, we're going to take some materials. Now Marmoset comes pre-installed with some materials, so we'll just click on this materials folder down here, and we're going to click plastic. Okay, and we're going to go down, and you can download different ones, but we're just going to go down and find one that I've used before, and we're going to go plastic stained, and we're going to just drag this into this folder, and then we've got this whole layer of plastic stained. This is on a triplanar thing. We can change it to UV if we want, but I think with triplanar it works nicely. We can change the contrast of the albedo a little bit. Okay, that's just going to give us a little bit of definition and a little bit of dirt in our map. What we're going to do is we're going to resize our project settings. So under texture project, we can go up to here, we can go resize, and we're going to change it from 4K to 512. Right, and we're going to resize that. Okay, so this is quite a low quality texture now, so or a low resolution texture, and if you look at the bottom you'll see there's barely any detail at all. We can also just up the scale a little bit so that we've got a little bit more scale to this. Okay, so we've got that, and then we're gonna search for glass. Okay, so you can bring in your own materials as well, and I'm just going to bring this above the plastic. Okay, now we've got this glass material. It's not opacity or anything, but we don't need to, and I'm just going to then drag this across, and then it highlights our vertex colors that we already had before, and I'm going to bring this onto the screen. So we've got this screen, and we can change this color of the glass as well. So I'm going to give it more of a monitor hue. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so that's looking good. We're still in the PBR workflow right now. We're just applying textures, and then we can go to do the plastic again. Actually let's just duplicate this one, right click and duplicate. Okay, we got plastic stained one, and we'll just change that, and we can drag this onto the yellow vertex color for our knobs, and what we can do then is we can now change the color of that, so that's a slightly different color. Okay, we can fiddle with this again later, but you can see what's happening. We're slowly building up our layering. Okay, so above that we want to add a paint layer in actually. Okay, and we just really want to drag this paint layer onto the red vertex colors. Okay, so that when we paint it's only affecting that layer. So I'm going to give this a bright red color. Okay, and we're going to paint one of the lights, we're going to paint another one of the lights, and then we can give it a green color for this one, and I'm going to just make my brush size a little bit smaller up here, or maybe not that small, and we're going to paint this green light in the middle, and then we'll give it a green light down here, and I gave a red light on the other one. Okay, and you notice it goes blurry in here. It's because we're in ray tracing mode still. So now that we don't really need to be in ray tracing mode anymore, we can just go into raster, come back to our texture project, and finally I'm going to do an orange light for this. I'm going to do an orangey yellow light for this one here. We'll just make the brush size a bit bigger. Okay, so you can see there we've got our lights done, we've got our knobs done. Okay, so now we can choose a rubber material. Right, we're just adding our materials. Okay, and I'm just going to bring that onto above here. Okay, and you'll notice that's all black, and I'm just going to choose a orangey color. Okay, and we're going to drag, actually we'll duplicate this first. Okay, and we're going to drag rubber 1 onto these cyan kind of color, and with this one we go for a purpley color, and we'll drag that onto these purpley ones, and then we've got our basic material, right? We've painted, and finally we want to maybe just go back to our paint layer and change it to a red. And then we can use our magic wand tool just to select these 2 cables, holding down shift to select the second one. And then we can just go back to our paintbrush and should be able to paint these red. They might need their own paint layer, so let's see if filling, no, oh, it's because it's not part of that mask. Okay, so let's make a new paint layer. Okay, and then just use this magic wand on that, holding down shift to click, and then on this paint layer we'll go over to our paintbrush, we'll choose a red color, and you'll notice that this is using way too much of the UVs. I didn't notice that. I would use a lot less of the UVs for this, and now we can just paint these cables red. Okay, and that just gives a little bit of contrast to the rest of it. And then we can just choose the marquee tool, and we can just drag off the model to, you can sort of drag portions of the model. There's all sorts of things that you can do, like you can select by UV island and things like that. This is really handy. These tools up here are super handy. Like I said, this is taking up way too much of the UV, but it is what it is. Okay, so now if we go from up here under full quality, come down to our render passes, material values, and albedo, you'll notice that we've just got this albedo color. So this is where we want to start layering in some of our baked maps. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to add a fill layer. All right, I'm going to choose the albedo map, and we're going to choose, did we bake our cavity? There it goes. Okay, so we've got our cavity map, and we want to change this from triplanar to UV. This is very annoying. And then we want to change our blending from standard to multiply, and you'll notice that we start to get these kind of cool outlines. Okay, so we can actually bring up that, and we're getting, now you can start to see what's happening. We're starting to get a non-photorealistic effect. Okay, so actually just before that, I want to add a procedural layer of turbulence. Okay, and this is just to give a little bit of chaos to the whole thing. So we can change this to maybe multiply as well and bring the opacity right down. We're just getting like a little bit of chaos here. We can try a few different we could go darken. I think darken works quite nicely. Okay, so we've got this turbulence. We can actually change the intensity and the scale of it. I'm going to do this scale quite high, something like that. Okay, and then we can bring the opacity right down. So this is just a very subtle effect, blending in. And then above this fill layer, we'll add another fill layer, And this one is going to be the AO. So we're just going to bring these in. I don't know why, but I can't automatically set the projection method to UV, so I've got to change it each time. So now we've got the AO, and we can mess with the contrast, but before we go and multiply this in, what I want the AO to do is I don't want it to be fully blackening out these areas. I just want it to be a little bit with the contrast there, so something like that, and then we can just directly multiply that in. Right, you can see what's happening. We're starting to get a really cool effect, right? We can come back down to our plastic stained, and we can give it a different color. I want to give it like more of an old computer color. I feel like that turbulence still might be too, maybe it's the wrong. Alright, so we're just bringing these in. You can see what the cavity's doing. So this is the cavity layer, so we're going to call this cavity. And we can bring the contrast on that down a little bit, or up a bit, depending on the effect that you want, right? So if you want this real kind of cartoony effect, you can bring that right up. It kind of works like stroke in Photoshop, right? So I'm going to bring that down like that. Okay. And this is looking quite nice, but it's still not giving the effect that we really want. Okay, so let's go back into our full quality, right? And we've got this here. And then we've got our sky texture, which is quite high. Okay, we want to bring this down a bit. Okay, and if we go into our render passes lighting, and we can look at our specular lighting, you'll be able to see only the reflections. So now, if we bring in a light, okay, it's automatically set to a spotlight. We can change it to an omni light just for the sake of ease. Press W on your keyboard and then change this to world space, so we can just move it around easier. Okay, so we can pull this up, and as we increase the brightness, you can see the specular light. Now, I want this screen to kind of have like a reflection on it that's baked in. So we want to move this specular light, and we want to give it I want to give it a slight hue. All right. And if I look at it from the front, because remember the rays, if we look at our bake project, and we look at our low poly, and if we show the skew, our rays are coming in directly from that. So if we look directly at that, that's where the rays are going to come. So that's where the image is going to come in. So going back to our light, we just want to move this around. So this is only showing us the specular lighting. And then I think I want to duplicate this 2 times. Okay, so we can press W to grab one to the side. And I just want to come over here to give a little bit of highlights on the side and also on the cables. So we can bring the brightness down of this one a little bit and bring it in a little bit closer and down a little bit. Right, so we're going to get those nice highlights on the cables. Alright, and then the other one, light 3, we're also just going to drag that to the side. This one doesn't matter quite as much. And this one, alright, we should be able to mess around with that later on. So we're going to go back to our bake project. We're going to scroll down and we're going to turn off everything except for specular lighting. Okay, and we're going to stick all of these in a group, in a folder. Okay, and we're just going to call this specular lighting. It's getting a little bit complex, but this is how we go. So we're going to bake these, just this map of specular lighting. Okay. Give it a moment. Okay, so that map's now baked. Okay, so we can come back down to our render passes, material values albedo only. And now if we come back to our texture project, add another fill layer. Okay, and then we can choose our albedo map for this one to be specular. Okay, so once again changing it to UV, and you can see that that specular lighting is now baked in there. So you can see the effect that it's had on the sides and that. So we can now, if we start to bring the opacity down, we can see that that is something like that. So I think we want to change this to overlay. Okay, and bring the opacity down, and you can also mess with the contrast. So if we actually think I want to darken the base albedo and maybe give it a, I don't know, let's have a look. Okay, so with our specular contrast, I wonder if overlay's the best. Light, and we'll just go through these and see if we can find something nice. Linear burn. Linear burn looks quite nice. Okay, so what I think, we can mess with the color of it here. Okay, we can also add a tint, right? But I'm going to bring this down like that. Okay, bring the contrast up, and maybe add a little bit more light to it now. And the contrast, so as the contrast goes up, we can do the opacity down. We've got that light baked in. And I think what we want to do is we actually want to bake that again with the sky turned off. I think the sky might have been having an effect on that. So let's just go to the bake project, bake that one more time. Okay, and that's rebaked. Now, I think this light here might have been a bit close, so let's just mess around with our lights a little bit. Back in, it's a lot of like wiggling around and getting it right, but we'll go to specular complete. Okay, that's a little bit close, or maybe a little bit bright. Yeah, something like that. This one can probably come down in brightness, and maybe bring it up a little bit, and this one can come far away. We can turn the sky on, and we don't really want much color from that coming in, and we'll use a different HDR just for this, because we do want a little bit of sort of global specular lighting. And I think that works quite nicely. We'll bring the brightness down. Don't know if bringing a child light in will help with anything. No, we'll get rid of the child light there. And with the sky, we'll just mess with the rotation a bit and bring the brightness right down. So we're getting a little bit of specular coming in. With this one, light 3, we can bring the brightness right down, and same with light 2, we can bring the brightness right down. With light 1, maybe a little bit, might be a little bit too bright. Okay, and then we're going to hit bake again. Right, now that that's baked, let's see what effect that's had on the albedo. Okay, that looks a lot nicer to my eye. Okay, so we can now try and meddle with the contrast a bit. And the opacity. Can bring this down a little bit. and maybe use a different blending mode. And I think maybe just add. I think overlay is good because it brings in some of the atmosphere. Okay, so that's that, and that you've got this little reflection on the screen which we can control with the contrast here. And it's getting a little bit mucky, but that's okay. You can see what we're getting. We can actually mess with our AO and our ambient occlusion a little bit as well. We can call this AO, and we can just mess with the contrast on that. And I think that gives it a little bit more emphasis as well, especially in these like little crevices here. This is, we don't want it to be too much like that, but we can really dial it in a little bit like that. So I think that's just starting to look really nice. Next we want to do a diffuse lighting pass. Okay, so we'll turn off specular lighting and we'll do diffuse. We'll go back into render passes and lighting, and we'll look at our diffuse. Oh, actually we'll do a complete lighting pass. Okay, so we want to turn our sky on, and we want to maybe choose a different HDRI this time. Something like let's have a look at this. I want to get some shadows. No. I want to get some direct. Let's turn the brightness up. No. Okay. You can maybe add a light like that, rotate it around, and we're going to get some nice shadows in here like this. Turn the brightness down, turn the child brightness up for our shadows, and we'll get those shadows like right in the front like that. Okay, so we're getting these like little shadows like that. Okay, and then we can hit bake on that one, just making sure that that's the complete lighting, and we can maybe also, no, we'll just do that as the lighting, so we'll hit bake on that one. Okay, and we can come back to our albedo pass. Okay, and our texture project, and add a new fill layer, set it to UV, and bring in the complete lighting. Okay, and that has come in like that. It's all red. It's actually somehow picked up the red from the other guy, but if we hit this to multiply and bring the opacity down, or to overlay, right, and we want to just get, I don't know why that's set to red, but we can set it to whatever color we like. A darker gray, and we can just increase the contrast on that a little bit. And we're starting to get those shadows in here as well. So this is a real stylized effect, right? So by increasing the contrast, we get more shadow and less, but you can see that there's a lot of shadows on the side, so we don't want too much of it, but we want just enough. And we can come back down to our specular lighting and add a little bit more specular lighting there. Now One thing that we haven't done yet is added our highlights. So we want to come down to this turbulence layer, and we want to just bring in here, and we want to come up and we want to add our curvature to this new fill layer. Okay, change it to UV. Alright, and we're getting that, and we can just multiply that in. Alright, and this is going to be the thing that brings in this detailed highlight on the corners, and we can change the contrast of this to how we like it. So the more contrast you add, the more I'm looking at the wrong thing. So as I bring this contrast down, now we're getting this nice effect around the edge. We can also change the brightness of the curvature and the color of it. So if we wanted to have like a slightly green hint to it, we can. Okay, so this is looking more or less finished to me. It's got baked in lighting. If you look at the bottom, it's low detail because we won't look at the bottom of this. And it's a single albedo map. So as we turn these off, you can see what we've achieved. So let's bring this across and turn these on one by one. So we've got our base plastic, then a little bit of a different color. Maybe I want to change the color of these later. And we're just adding in our colors, and then a little bit of texture, and then our AO, our specular lighting, and our complete lighting. Okay, so you could also do a diffuse lighting layer as well and layer in a little bit more detail. But what we're going to do for one final step is we're going to add a dirt layer, right? And we're going to change the color of this to like a brown, right? A browny color. Okay, and then we can change the intensity like that, contrast. Okay, and then we want to just overlay this as well. Okay, and we can bring the opacity right down, and we can choose a grunge map. So we can just go up to our library and type in leaks, and just bring in something like this into our grunge layer. Okay, so if we turn this back into standard, turn our opacity up, you can see that we're getting this nice grunge layer over the top. We can even maybe just try and copy that in, although it is using the ambient occlusion, so I think multiply might be a better, also overlay might be a better option for that. And if we turn that off and on, you can see that we're getting this extra layer of texture. Might want to give that a little bit more opacity. So we've got this here. I think that looks really nice. I think that's a really cool retro asset. And if we just turn our lights off, there you have it. So I know that was a fairly long one, but I hope you learned something. I think this is a cool effect. Like I said before, you don't need to do this in Marmoset. You can do it in other software as well, but Marmoset basically, it's like Marmoset Toolbag. It's like the best name for it. It has all of the tools that you would need to basically get this effect. So you can look at our albedo map. We've got our screen, our cables, which is massive in the UV for some reason. We've got all our little bits and pieces, all our little keys hidden over somewhere, and we've got this nice stylized retro computer. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one, and I hope you all have a great day. Tschüss.